Hey everyone, Ben Stowell here with philosophy number 3. Today is the 20th of January 2026, and something I wanted to, today we'll be talking about Michael Huemer on intellectual virtue, but right before that, I was wanting to address something that popped in my head as a follow-up from my testimony video, which is the question of how convenient is it for someone to lose faith in Christianity? Because a critique or an objection that a Christian might have against an ex-Christian is, well, you lost faith, but it was convenient for you, or it was easy for you to do this. And that usually kind of goes along with this misguided idea of you're just suppressing the truth and unrighteousness. You just want to sin guilt-free. And that's just not true. That's not true in my case, and it's not going to be true in a lot of cases of ex-Christians. That kind of psychoanalysis just ignores the real arguments that we have, the real challenges to Christian belief. And my response to that question of how convenient was this for you in my case, and I think I touched on this at least a bit in the testimony video, for me it was extremely inconvenient. C.S. Lewis has this quote where he says he was the least the least likely or the most resistant convert in all of England when he converted to Christianity. That's kind of how I felt, but in the opposite direction. It took many years, and I mentioned kind of the up and down kind of trajectory of my faith, the constant struggling. So it took many years, many long, dark nights of the soul kind of thing. But what's funny is that in this post that I wrote on Michael Huemer on intellectual virtue, I actually talk about this. I talk about what you lose when you lose faith in God. So I can actually just kind of list some of these things that I lost and that someone can lose when they lose faith in God, showing just how inconvenient it is. So it's not losing faith out of convenience or because it's easy, but the opposite. It's extremely inconvenient. It's very difficult. It's doing the right thing, which is oftentimes the difficult thing to do. So going through this list of what you lose when you lose God, it's kind of a long list. I think I have 21 items here. So the first one is all of your past attempts to convert people are retroactively misguided, embarrassing, and harmful. Number 2, you have to face the fact that you were massively mistaken this whole time. And that can make it, I think, a lot harder for older people to lose faith because you were wrong for that much longer, for that much higher of a percentage of your life. And so you'd have to kind of face the idea that you have, in some sense, wasted your life. And so that's a massive cost to trying to face when it comes to facing the falsity of your worldview. If you're younger, though, it might be a bit easier. But that's number 2. You have been massively mistaken all this time. Your parents and your community around you, your family, also have been massively mistaken all this time. Number 4, your heroes, such as pastors or missionaries, also have been massively mistaken all this time. The church as a whole, Christendom as a whole, has been massively mistaken all this time. Number 5, concluding that Christianity is false means losing your place in the church and losing your sense of community, requiring you to go alone or to find a new community. Number 6, losing family members and potentially being disowned by parents. Number 7, facing the reality that death is the permanent end of you, losing the sense that life is this grand, eternal adventure, and coming to view life as infinitely less meaningful than before. Number 8, losing the belief that you, as an eternal being, are a being of infinite worth, coming to the view that your value turns out to be very limited. Number 9, facing the reality that there is no God who loves you, further removing a significant source of validation and sense of self-worth. Number 10, removing all future experiences of feeling God's presence in prayer and feeling loved by God. Number 11, removing the sense of purpose of going forth to create disciples of every nation. Number 12, feeling pressured by time now that you only have one life to live. Number 13, losing the sense of safety that comes with believing that there is a loving God watching over you and your family, potentially becoming more anxious and distrusting of life, losing the ability to embrace life as this fundamentally safe thing, and instead finding yourself living with a greater sense of dread, fear, and paranoia. That's my own experience. I won't speak on behalf of other ex-Christians or non-Christians, but for me, that was a big part of losing God, is losing this sense of safety that comes with belief in God, feeling this sense of protection and so on. Number 14, losing the sense that life is ultimately fair and just, as God will perfectly judge everyone in the end and set the record straight. Instead, life is made out to be brutally unfair, and all sorts of injustices will never be set straight ever. This is especially true for innocent victims of disease and murder. Number 15, losing the belief that evils will be redeemed and made meaningful. Instead, evils are left gratuitous. Number 16, losing the hope that you will one day see your loved ones again in heaven. Number 17, losing the sentiment that this world is worth fighting for, that this world is fundamentally good. Number 18, losing the belief that you must be as good a person as possible because this life is a test by God and any evils committed will be acknowledged by God later on Judgment Day. Instead, evil people straight up get away with their evil in many cases and indeed are often advantaged by it. 19, losing the belief that life is ultimately full of a deep spiritual reality, that life is a grand story. Instead, life is profoundly shallow, empty, and boring, nothing more than particles smashing together in extremely complex but ultimately meaningless ways. So the point before about the grand story of life, that was more of the adventure of life, the fact that life goes on forever, it's eternal. But this one is more about the meaning of the day-to-day things here while on earth. There's no further representation of anything. One way I've thought about this before when I was a Christian is that the rocks and trees and the mountains, the sky, the animals, all of it, it's all in some sense reflecting God. It's all a representation of God's handiwork. And so there's this kind of created meaning behind everything. There's this sense of purpose, of this is here for a reason. There's a creator behind it. There's a mind behind all of it. And so there's this enhanced sense of story, right? There's a story kind of behind everything. And there's an affirmation of it, right? There's an all-wise, all-powerful being that affirms all of the trees, all the rocks, all the mountains, and etc. And so there's this like deep affirmation of life, affirmation of all the things we see. It's there because it was placed there deliberately by a God who has perfect understanding. And so he's not wrong about anything. He's not wrong about placing all these things here. And so everything is kind of enchanted with God. Everything is, in a sense, possessed by God. And God is in control of all of it. And so in that point, number 19, you lose that. You lose that sense that everything is enchanted. Everything is hollowed out. The spiritual enchantment is now gone. And everything is hollowed out. And you're left with this sense of emptiness. Everything is empty. Everything is boring. Everything is on a trajectory of destruction. Number 20, losing all basis by which to live one's life, feeling lost and confused, right? So if you live for God, in some sense, in your mind, if God is kind of an orientation for your life and then you lose God, then you are now, it's like having the ground disappear beneath your feet and now you're just falling. Number 21, losing all sense of one's identity and place in the world, no longer made in God's image or a child of God or regenerated by the Holy Spirit, etc. And also, if you lose your church community, if you stop going to church because it's just kind of awkward, then you can lose, so I'm kind of adding a number 22 here, you lose your sense of ritual. And that ritual can give you a sense of peace and all this. I don't know if I mentioned prayer, but you lose prayer. And prayer can be a huge, a very powerful tool, especially for people like me who deal with anxiety issues. Prayer can be a very powerful tool for dealing with anxiety. But if you lose that, if you lose prayer, then you lose that tool for dealing with anxiety. Also, a sense of friendship. I mentioned divine friendship, the idea of divine friendship, which the philosopher Anne Jeffrey has worked on. You lose that. You lose the sense of a friend. You lose God. You lose your friendship or your sense of friendship, your relationship with God, your walk with God, as Christians would call it. So there's just so many things, like 24 or so things that you lose when you lose faith in God. I'm really happy to see that I actually put this kind of at somewhat of a random spot here in my post on Michael Huemer on intellectual virtue, but it's actually not that random. It actually makes sense because I'm showing, because there's so much you lose when you lose faith in God, that can generate a lot of bias in Christians to resist, to resist losing faith in God, to resist changing their mind. They want it to be true. And that was the case for me. I wanted it. I still want it. I still, in some sense, want God to exist. I want Christianity to be true. In some sense, obviously, I don't really want the infernalistic kind where like babies burn in hell or whatever, the like kind of stupid Catholic kind of versions, whatever. The infernalistic, the bad versions of it. I mean, and some ex-Christians, non-Christians would argue that all forms of Christianity are necessarily bad for one reason or another. But if you can at least come up with a better version, at least the more general, maybe we can set the specificities aside, but the specific doctrines aside, but at least the general idea of a grand adventure, a grand story, a more meaningful life, a life that goes on forever. Of course, I want those things. I think it's kind of crazy not to want those things, even though I know that there are philosophers who argue for anti-theism, which is the view that we ought not want God to exist. But in any case, that's just kind of my own psychology. I wanted God to exist more than anything. I wanted Christianity to be true more than anything. And at least to some degree, I still feel that way. And so it is not remotely easy or convenient, at least in my case, and I would say for a lot of ex-Christians, for a lot of non-Christians, it's not convenient at all. It is one of the most difficult things for someone to go through. Okay, so in fact, a couple more points I might add onto that. Like one would be like losing a deeper sense of love for humanity, because now it's a more cynical view kind of now takes over. Like humans are not made in the image of God. They're not these kingly creatures, part of a grand story. They're just kind of random animals that are the result of particles smashing together. And so it turns out that humans are a lot more boring and a lot less purposefully made, than what you originally thought. And so human value is massively reduced. And so not only does that affect your own sense of self and your own sense of value, but also your sense of love for humans and for humanity as a whole. And so you kind of lose this idealistic view of humanity and you fall down to a more cynical view of humanity. And likewise, I kind of touched on this in these points, but a greater sense of pessimism over the whole of reality. Yeah. Anyway, so the thought of losing all of this is understandably terrifying. So it's not remotely fair to expect a Christian to not feel any fear whatsoever over the thought that Christianity is false. But it is fair to call out a Christian for not overcoming that fear and doing the right thing as a true seeker and engaging in opposition material. Opposition material being books or papers that argue that Christianity is false. And so the point here is about the nature of virtue, that it's not so much a lack of fear. In this case, we're talking about intellectual bravery, right? The bravery that the Christian demonstrates when they engage in opposition material. There is a fear there. It's not fearlessness, but they're overcoming that fear. But I don't know. I mean, you could go the other way and say if the Christian really truly understands the importance of subjecting their own beliefs to a critique, then they will feel a kind of fearlessness because they understand that either their Christian beliefs will fail to stand up to scrutiny, in which case that's good for you because now you can shed those beliefs and adopt beliefs that are closer to the truth. Or you'll see how your Christian beliefs do stand up to the truth, and therefore you will be closer to the truth that way. And so you could, I think, try to argue that actually, yes, a truly virtuous person, because they have this understanding, that understanding will drive a kind of fearlessness. And so, intellectual cowardice in this context is feeling fear when you shouldn't. And in that case, bravery really is just the lack of fear. And so that's one option. But the other option is actually, no, it's perfectly understandable why a Christian would, if not fear, then maybe like discomfort or hatred, discomfort towards the idea that Christianity is false, or hatred towards the idea that Christianity is false. It's all too understandable why a Christian would feel that way. And yet, if that Christian has the intellectual virtue of bravery, then they will also feel this determination that comes from this understanding of, I need to critique my beliefs. I need to see whether my beliefs can stand up to reason. And there could be a way to synthesize those two views. But anyway, when it comes to the nature of virtue and all that, I'll discuss that later. For now, I really just want to share some quotes from Michael Huemer. This is from Knowledge, Reality, and Value, 2021. Page 25. What is it to think rationally? It is, in a certain sense, to think correctly. It is, for example, to accept the conclusions that one has good reason to accept, to avoid contradicting oneself, to avoid invalid deductive inferences or uncogent non-deductive inferences, to avoid reasoning circularly, and so on. I don't mean necessarily having true beliefs. It is possible to be fully rational but mistaken, and also possible to be highly irrational, yet luckily arrive at the truth. Page 26. This shows that one can think rationally yet be wrong, and one can think irrationally yet be right. This can happen, but of course it usually does not. One way of characterizing rational belief is to say that they are the beliefs that are likely to be true, given the experiences and information available to you at the time. Notice, by the way, that what is rational to believe is, as we say, relative to an observer. In other words, believing P could be rational for one person, but not for another. This is because people might have different experiences and information available to them. Page 27. People sometimes wonder, why should we be rational? Given my account of rationality above, this question is not really sensible. It is like asking the question, why are cats so feline? Or, what color was George Washington's white horse? If you understand what the question means, you don't need to ask it. To ask why one should be rational is to request a reason for being rational. But this is, in effect, to ask for a reason for responding to reasons. For example, a reason for believing what one has most reason to believe. If P is the rational thing for you to believe, then by definition, it makes sense for you to believe that, because that's what we meant by calling it rational. Once you have granted that P is rational, you've already granted that you have sufficient reason to believe P, so you don't need an additional reason to believe the rational things. Okay, so now this is me writing. Though you might wonder what is the goal of rationality, or what goal does rationality further? That answer is easy. The goal is to arrive at true beliefs and to avoid false beliefs. As Huemer puts it, so when someone asks, why be rational? Perhaps they are asking why aim at having true beliefs. And Huemer gives two reasons for seeking truth. First, your goals require you to have true beliefs. And second, it is immoral to think irrationally. Continuing, page 32, intellectual virtues are character traits that help us form beliefs well, particularly traits that tend to help you get to the truth and avoid error in normal circumstances. Rationality is the master intellectual virtue, the one that subsumes all the others. So, if you are rational, you are intellectually virtuous, and vice versa. But there is another intellectual virtue that is also extremely important, so much so that it also deserves a section of its own in this chapter. The virtue is objectivity. Objectivity, like all other intellectual virtues, is part of rationality. The character trait of objectivity is a disposition to resist bias, and hence to base one's beliefs on the objective facts. The main failures of objectivity are cases where your beliefs are overly influenced by your personal interests, emotions, or desires, or by how the phenomenon in the world is related to you, as opposed to how the external world is independent of you. Page 33, we often think of those we are arguing with as opponents, but we really shouldn't do so. We should think of them as fellow truth seekers. Page 34. Objectivity is not to be confused with neutrality. I am not recommending that you refuse to take a side on controversial issues. It is generally false that both sides are equally good, and you should not refuse to evaluate issues. What I am recommending is that if you take a side, you nevertheless treat the other side fairly, even while defending your side. I am recommending that you treat intellectual debate as a mutual truth-seeking enterprise rather than as a personal contest. Page 34. As a rational thinker, you want your beliefs to be true, so you should welcome the opportunity to discover if your own current view is wrong. Then you can eliminate a mistaken belief and move closer to the truth. If you are afraid to confront the strongest opposing views, represented in the fairest way possible, that means that you suspect that your own beliefs are not up to the challenge, which means you already suspect that your beliefs are false. Page 35. The main thing human beings need to make progress on debates in philosophy and religion and politics is more objectivity. The human mind is not really designed for discovering abstract philosophical truths. Our natural tendency is to try to advance our own interests or the interests of the group we identify with, and we tend to treat intellectual issues as a proxy battleground for that endeavor. Again, we don't expressly decide to do this, we do it automatically unless we are making a concerted, conscious effort not to. And naturally, when we do this, we form all sorts of false beliefs, because reality does not adjust itself to whatever is convenient for our particular social faction. Page 38. All the paradigm forms of prejudice are, centrally and obviously, failures to be objective. So, Huemer gives tips on becoming more objective. Paraphrasing, number 1, acknowledge your bias. Number 2, diversify your sources of information. And number 3, think of reasons why your own views might be wrong. Huemer points out a curious paradox, the paradox of bias and knowledge. The most biased folks tend to be the most knowledgeable. A scientist is biased in favor of the view that science is really important, but that scientist is also knowledgeable about science. The solution is to not throw out biased views automatically, as that would require throwing out well-informed views. Instead, diversify your exposure to well-informed yet biased views to get a more balanced picture of the options available and the arguments for and against each option.